This year's Ella Conference is appreciative of all of our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, Gallagher. Our gold sponsors, the Arkansas SHRM chapters of NOARC and CARA, Windstream, Cross Gunner Witherspoon and Gouchus, and Wright Lindsay Jennings. Our silver sponsors, SFLIC, Consolidated Admin Services, Friday Eldridge and Clark, and the West Central Arkansas SHRM chapter. Our bronze sponsors, First Staff and the Human Resources team. Now, let's hear a special welcome from Cindy Cobb with Cross Gunner Witherspoon and Gouchus.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Cobb, and I'm a director at Cross Gunner Witherspoon and Gouchus. CGWG has been a longtime supporter of the Ella Conference, Arkansas SHRM, and its chapters. I've previously served as the chair of the Ella Conference, and I have the honor this year of serving as the president of CARA. CGWG practices in a wide variety of industries and businesses. Of course, we're known for our labor and employment practice and the legal expertise and practical guidance we provide to our clients and their HR professionals, such as yourselves, whether it be from drafting policies, including vaccination and COVID-related policies, responding to agency charges, or defending lawsuits. Our attorneys intertwine decades of legal experience with practical knowledge of business operations to provide effective and economic solutions for our clients. We are dedicated to outstanding service, skillful guidance, and an open line of communication. Our clients deserve our prompt attention, which is why we practice a team approach to meet our clients' needs. At Cross Gunner Witherspoon and Gouchus, we believe our clients receive the highest quality legal services when their legal representation reflects the diversity of our communities. We also believe that the advancement of qualified individuals with diverse backgrounds is critical. In that spirit, we're proud that CGWG is a majority women-owned law firm, the largest law firm in the state with such a distinction. Our firm's goal is to use our experience to the benefit of our clients. We pride ourselves on being a team, and we'd be honored to be your legal team. Enjoy the conference.
Well, hello there. I am Keneasha Scott. I'm the Director of Regulatory Compliance for K. Scott Consults, LLC. Thanks for being here at this conference, however you're joining us. Today, we're going to talk about an oldie but goodie. Come in out of the dark. OSHA violations that have been hidden in plain sight. We'd like to talk about how COVID caught us. OSHA is now celebrating their 50-year anniversary. So they've been around since 1971. But COVID-19 kind of caught a lot of businesses off guard. So what I always ask, wherever you are, especially if you're somewhere safe, stand up. Everybody in the room, stand up. And we're going to go through a series of questions. And we're going to see, do you fall under this list? My company is in the United States of America. My company is not a municipality. So like you're not a government, local, state, federal government, school district, something like that. My company employs employees. One employee. Or you're the only employee of your company. So if you just stood on that line there, this does not apply to you. You fall under OSHA's jurisdiction if you are in the United States, if you're not a municipality, if you're not falling under a municipality, and if you employ employees. So this is where the confusion has come in at. A lot of companies did not realize that they fell under this Code of Federal Regulations. So a little textbook. Code of Federal Regulations, Title 29, labor, wage and hour. Then you got labor with breaks and overtime pay. And then you got our favorite, labor, the Health and Safety Division that falls under OSHA. And a lot of companies say, well, I didn't know I had to comply with OSHA. Well, do you pay your workers? Are their wage and hours paid correctly? Guess what? It's all under the same Code of Federal Regulations. It just falls under 1904, 1910, and 1926. Now, quick breakdown of that. 1904 is where everyone has to fall under for record keeping. Then you have your general industry under 1910. 1926 is construction. That may be most of you. Then you've got maritime and agriculture. All right, your first thing, HASCOM regulation was the very first. You've got to be in compliance with HASCOM. A lot of people reference this as your chemical safety program. So if you've got chemicals in your building, guess what? You must have a HAZCOM program. That's your listing of chemicals. Your labeling, make sure all your chemical bottles are labeled. Like a lot of you had to go out and buy sanitizer. You gotta make sure those bottles are labeled. You gotta make sure your workers are trained in the use of those chemicals so they know where they're supposed to be storing those chemicals, what PPE they're supposed to use. You gotta have safety data sheets on those chemicals. On a safety data sheet, you'll see first aid measures, PPE, firefighting measures. Maybe that chemical may say, don't store in a building over 70 degrees. You cannot store that outside in Arkansas summers. So HAZCOM regulation, that's one of them where people have been getting violated on because they haven't been following that because they didn't know they had to comply. PPE, that was the big one, right? Everybody, we need PPE. And everybody calls me and they're like, Keneasha, I gotta figure out how to get PPE. I said, well, you first need to assess the workplace for hazards. It specifically says 1910.132, assess the workplace for hazards. And they ask, is that new? I'm like, no, it came out in 1983. So you've gotta assess the workplace for hazards for head, eye, face, hands, arms, legs, feet, body. Now, respiratory protection and hearing do not fall under the regular PPE standard because those are more health related. So respiratory falls under 134, hearing falls under 1910.95. But then you gotta have a written program. So you can't just go out and procure PPE. You gotta assess the workplace, certify it, then have a written program. Then you gotta train your employees, proper donning and doffing. That's just a fancy way of saying putting it on, taking it off. Then you gotta make sure your office personnel is covered with PPE. Like, do they have to wear steel-toe boots when they enter out into the manufacturing floors? You gotta make sure they're covered. Then what discipline methods are you gonna do? When you catch people without their safety glasses, what are you gonna do? And guess what? You gotta pay for the PPE. Unless it's a non-specialty shoe, like PPE with your shoes, unless it's a specialty shoe, you don't have to cover that. But steel-toe boots, things like that, you don't have to be subject to cover that, but all other PPE, head all the way down to specialty shoes, you, the employer, have to cover that. The only exception, non-specialty shoes like steel-toe boots. Walking, working surfaces. Did you know you have to make sure people know how to walk? Yes, 1910.22. It's the housekeeping standard. Slip, trips, and falls are the #1 cause of workplace fatalities, second only to motor vehicle accidents. The standard says, this is so elementary, make sure your workplace is clean, orderly, sanitary, and dry as possible. That's all they ask for. Now, it's your definition of what's considered clean, orderly, sanitary, and dry as possible. Dry as possible because some workplaces do have to have wet floors and things to do what they need to do. So keep it as dry as possible. Your ladders, we do a whole class on ladders. Make sure, before you just go out giving ladders to everybody, that they really have a need to be climbing ladders. Why are your office personnel climbing on ladders? And people, well, it keeps them from standing on the drawer on the bottom of the file cabinet to reach the top. Maybe you need to have them put in a work order so that maintenance, who's trained in ladders, can use a ladder or access the ladders. Can I come in your office and just put my hands on a ladder? That should not be possible. So make sure you've got control of your ladders as well. We found out self-inspections and safety incentive programs were a mess as well. Oh yeah, you've got people going in, well, we're gonna inspect our workplace to figure out how we can convert it over for COVID. And it's like, we're doing this all new. And I always ask, y'all hadn't been doing inspections of your facility? You don't wanna wait till OSHA shows up? Inspect your own facility, self-inspections of your facility. Or a safety incentive program. A lot of times people put safety incentive programs in to say, you know, if Department A doesn't have any accidents, then they're gonna get a steak dinner. OSHA frowns on those type of safety incentive programs. A safety incentive program that's effective is something where it does not discourage workers from reporting accidents. If you and I know, because I love steak, if I know that I'm gonna miss out on a steak dinner if we have an accident, I'm probably just not gonna report that accident. So make sure you put in safety incentive programs where you incentivize controlling the hazard. Maybe you say, if Department A does their own self-inspection and they discover and correct 5 hazards a week, we'll get them a steak dinner. But do not tie an incentive program to discouraging reporting of accidents. Drug and alcohol policies. All right, we're gonna tell our age. In the second grade, Nancy Reagan said, just say no to drugs. That should be enough. It is not enough. You have to tell workers they cannot be under the influence of drugs and alcohol at work. I'll pause here. Yes, you have to tell your employees they cannot be under the influence of drugs and alcohol at work. All right, you got to have a written policy in place. Arkansas Workers' Comp has a rule called Rule 36. It's basically where you have a written policy in place that says, we will drug test you. Before you even come in the building, there's a sign up that says, employees employed here are subjected to drug tests. So if I'm under the influence of illegal drugs, it lets me know there's no need in you applying to work there. And that drug and alcohol policy can be post-accident, new hire, random, reasonable suspicion. Make sure that if you do post-accident drug screens, that you've had someone evaluate that. Make sure you either test for all workplace accidents or you test for the unsafe act of the accident. For example, if I run over you with a forklift, it was my unsafe act that caused your injury. You go to the hospital, you go be drug tested. They find out you're under influence of drugs. You didn't contribute to that accident. So you got to make sure your policy is set up to say, I'm either going to test for unsafe acts or all workplace accidents. The latest investigation we did, if you say you're going to test for all workplace accidents, even a bee sting, you have to drug test for it, because it could look like you unfairly applied your policy. I think someone in one of these sessions is going to be talking about medical marijuana. You can pause here and go over there and listen to that. We are not going to discuss that there. That's an entirely different set of regulations there. Chain of custody. You want to make sure that if you had to send an employee to be drug tested, that you took them to be drug tested, or you remained with them until the sample was offered up. Now, make sure you understand DOT policies are entirely separate. DOT, you have to treat those drivers differently when it's drugs and alcohol. And you can have a policy in place called a refusal to submit. You can say if you refuse to submit, you consider to have resigned. They can kind of help you with unemployment, but you didn't hear that from me. Drug and alcohol written policy. If you have a drug and alcohol written policy and you are an Arkansas employer under Arkansas Workers' Comp, you can submit that policy in and save yourself 5% on your Workers' Comp insurance by having a written drug and alcohol policy. So remember that. You've got to tell people that. At-fault attendance policies. Companies are still saying you got to have a doctor's note or we won't excuse the absence. Or if you don't go to the doctor and come back with a doctor's note, we're not going to pay for the absence. I'm just going to let you know. I could call any doctor today and say I need a doctor's note and I can get it. It does not mean I was sick. And I'll let you know that some sick people can't always go to the doctor. That's called having an at-fault attendance policy. And this is where we saw COVID kind of getting companies in trouble, because now you're requiring employees to go be tested or their pay is affected. So what are they going to do? They're coming to work sick. Because we're not going to take their word for it. We need to have a written report. They're going to come to work sick, and now we've got a spread going on. Now, there's some legal stuff going on about how you handle it when it's COVID or whatever, but at-fault attendance policies basically encourage workers to come to work sick. If they don't have the money for a copay, or they don't have the money to go in to see the doctor, and you tell them they're not going to get paid unless they have that doctor's note, they are coming to work sick. You have to trust me there. They're coming to work sick. That's called an at-fault attendance policy. My suggestion with companies, because we've seen where this works, is if you weren't in paid status and you didn't request a day off, you're getting an attendance point regardless if you bring a doctor's note or not. The subsequent days won't count against you, but that first day, because it discourages workers from coming to work sick. So that's what they mean by at-fault. Exposure control plan. It's COVID. Everybody, I said, follow your exposure control plan. What does your exposure control plan tell you to do? Well, I don't know. Is that new? No. 29 CFR 1910-1030 is an exposure control plan. Some of you know it as your bloodborne pathogens plan. Plans for airborne illnesses, foodborne illnesses. FDA regulates that. Like if you got anything food processing in your facility, that's regulated by that. You've got to make sure that you have a plan in place to stop exposures long before COVID came along. If you have a needle stick and employees administering first aid to another worker, if someone's mopping up a blood spill, you had to have an exposure control plan on how to address that. If I came into contact with a worker who was injured, and now I've come into contact with blood or other potentially infectious material, I'm supposed to be offered a hepatitis B vaccine within 10 days of that. If you don't have an exposure control plan written and put together, employees are unaware of that. But if I come into contact with it, I'm supposed to be offered this vaccine. Now, I can refuse that vaccine, but it's not enough for me just to refuse it. You have to have them sign saying that they've declined it. And all of that's in 1910.1030. An exposure control plan has to be in place. Multiple violations of that. Now, these next ones are going to seem kind of weird, and some of them kind of funny, but they're there. General environmental controls. So, people call, well, Keneasha, we're going to turn off all the water. You can't turn off all the water for COVID protection because 1910.141 says you must have potable water. Now, no, we're in Arkansas. It is potable. I didn't leave out the R. It's 1910.141. You got to make sure you got water that is safe for workers to drink. So if you turn off water fountains, you must be able to supply water for those workers. They must be able to have potable water. Waste disposal. Do you have a place to dispose of those masks and things properly? You got to make sure people got somewhere to throw trash and not just on the floor in the workplace. You got to make sure you got vermin control. You know, people are like, well, we're just going to leave that back door open for ventilation. We're in Arkansas. Some of my cousins are subject to coming in that back door back there. You've got to have vermin control in place. All of this is in 1910.141 and tells you exactly how to handle it. Toilet facilities. A lot of, well, we'll close this restroom so that only so many people can get in here. No, under that same regulation, you've got to make sure you've got enough restrooms to accommodate the number of people going. And it must be restrooms with flushing toilets. Can't be buckets, cups, none of that. You ever notice on construction sites, they bring porta potties. Whatever it is you have to do, you've got to make sure everyone has adequate toilet facilities in there. And then emergencies. You must prepare for emergencies. Long before this pandemic took place, we had emergencies that happened, and you've got to prepare for them. You must have an emergency action plan. An emergency action plan, notice it doesn't say tornado plan, doesn't say earthquake plan. 1910.38 says you must have a plan in place for whatever emergencies that may take place at your facility. In Arkansas, we usually prepare for earthquakes, floods, tornadoes. If you all remember, anyone that worked in Little Rock, North Little Rock years ago, we had to prepare for CSEP, the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness, because the arsenal down in Pine Bluff. Wherever you're located, you have emergencies specific to your workplace. You have to prepare for those. You got to have a fire prevention plan. Fire extinguishers. If you have fire extinguishers, people have to be trained to use fire extinguishers. A lot of people laugh there and they go, everybody knows how to use a fire extinguisher, and I test them and I say, if you're right-handed, which hand will you squeeze the nozzle and which hand will you squeeze the trigger and which hand will you hold the nozzle? And they say, of course I'd squeeze with my right hand and I'd hold it with my left. And I say, try it. And they realize that's not how they want to do it. You want your dominant hand where the most force is used. Guess how you find that out? Fire extinguisher training. Alarm systems, employee alarm systems. If you have any type of fire alarm system in place, you have to make sure per 1910.165 that those are in operating order, that someone has come in and tested those to make sure that when I pull the pull station on the building, that it will sound an alarm throughout the building, because employees are relying on that for life safety. Exit routes was one that got a lot of people in trouble when people had to redo social distancing and exits and who was coming in. You've got to make sure that people are able to reach an exit route at all times. You cannot lock a door for security purposes. Say, well, I don't want people being able to come in. If you will have a door locked to keep people from coming in, it must be installed with some type of panic system so that the people on the inside are still able to open the door, but it's locked from the outside. So you cannot just go around and start blocking and locking exits because of life safety code. You've got to make sure people can get out in the event of an emergency. So that's in preparing for emergencies. And then accident investigations. We realized causation investigations were coming up, and this is how a lot of companies could not properly control workplace hazards. And sometimes OSHA will ask the company, why don't you do your own incident investigation? You've called us and said an employee's fingers have been cut off, because you got to call them. And they say, do your own investigation. And you're like, I don't know what to do. Or you investigate it and you say, well, I just told the employee don't do that again. That's not a proper accident investigation. To do an investigation, develop a team. You're trying to determine what the root cause of the accident was. And you've got to avoid bias when you're doing that. So you may need to get a team of people that aren't necessarily associated with that worker. We've all got that bad worker, and if you're at your workplace watching this, sitting next to that coworker, just keep looking at me. Don't turn and look at them, keep looking at me. But we all got one, we do. And we're a little biased because, you know, that's just Jack. Jack's always messing up. We don't want to do that. We want to get to the root cause, because Jack may be messing up because Jack is working with faulty equipment. So avoid bias. Then you want to document it. Then you want to assign some real tangible corrective action. Don't say, well, I just told Jack don't do that again. No. I'm going to send Jack to a class. I'm going to teach him how to drive the forklift again. I'm going to do something to make sure he does not make this violation again. Then you close the loop. Let me follow back up. Follow up for continuous improvement. Let me see, did he learn that? Here's a little accident investigation. Now, I'm not certifying you as an investigator. I tell everybody, still call me if you need an accident investigator. Here's an example. Flat tires in the parking lot. So you got flat tires in the parking lot. And you're like, well, why do I have flat tires in the parking lot? And you ask why. And they say, well, there's nails on the garage floor. You know, so do you stop there? No, you keep asking. Well, why are there nails on the garage floor? Well, because the box of nails on the shelf split open. Okay. Well, why did the box of nails on the shelf split open? Well, the box got wet. See where this is going? Keep asking. Well, it rained through the hole in the garage roof. Okay, so the nails are on the floor, flat tires, box got wet, it rained through the hole in the garage roof. Guess what? Why did it rain through the hole in the garage roof? Well, the roof shingles are missing. Guess what you can now do? You can keep going, but you've got something now you can fix. You can say, well, let me repair the shingles on the roof, and maybe that will solve flat tires in the parking lot. So that's what you do. You keep asking questions to get to the root cause of it. And keep asking, you know, don't ask why for 5 days, but you keep asking questions to find out. And then medical and first aid. You've got to make sure that you have medical and first aid readily available. Any of you in rural areas, it's going to take a while for you to call 911 and get EMTs dispatched. That's when you need to have a sufficient number of people. If you can't get to a hospital within 3 miles, a sufficient number of people trained in CPR. OSHA does not have a standard on CPR, but that's one of the questions that comes up. Could that person's life have been saved if someone at that facility had been trained in CPR? Or just first aid. You know, maybe you're not sending them to the hospital every time they have a cut. You've got somebody administering first aid on site. But you must have a plan in place for that. You must have an identified medical facility. We ask that question a lot. People call and say there's an accident. I'm like, where are they going to the doctor? Well, I don't know. You need to identify. You need to have you an occupational doctor somewhere they're going to go. Especially if you work in a rural area, make sure you know if you're working after 5:30, what clinic they're going to go to or which emergency room they're going to go to. And we always tell people, invite those people into your building for them to get an idea of what work people are doing. This isn't OSHA, this is a loss control side. If you're going to have people transported for medical, I'm going to advise you to always call 911 and get EMT transport. If you're not able to do EMT transport, and you're doing employer transport, make sure it's a supervisor or a manager doing the driving. Make sure they're using a company vehicle. If they're using their personal vehicle, it gets tricky. And make sure you've met a male-female ratio. Make sure it's at least 2 male, 1 female, 2 females, 1 male. Make sure there's always a witness in the car. If you've got to make a split-second decision and you think that ambulance is not going to make it on time, then you put them on your own vehicle, and that's something we'll go to bat and fight for you later about. But at all possible, try to wait on the ambulance to get there to administer aid. There's a case right now being litigated of a plant manager that took an employee to the hospital. We all believe he got the employee there better and quicker than the ambulance, but it's being fought right now as a result of that, so it is what it is. Let's say you don't follow any of that, or you're like, I don't think any of that applies to me. Guess what? OSHA can still get in your building and violate you under the General Duty Clause. The General Duty Clause is the clause that says from the 1970 OSHA Act, employers must furnish a workplace that is free from hazards, recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause serious physical harm or death. So meaning, if you don't remember any other violation, any other regulation, look at any recognized hazard that may cause or is likely to cause serious physical harm and death, and make sure your employees are protected, such as ergonomics. Arkansas, our former president of Arkansas, Bill Clinton, had the ergonomic standard when he was president. Well, we got really good with it, so they pulled it because it was too hard to fight with. That's our claim to fame. Arkansas sent a president that ergonomics. So that's our claim to fame there with ergonomics, but they pulled it. But guess what? You can still be cited for not having ergonomically sound workplaces, even though that's not a standard anymore. But that's make sure the worker is fitting the area that they're working, not making the worker fit the job, but make the job fit the worker. Like, don't make a worker bend down and work on a table. Find a table that's pulled up for them to work on. If your workers are at home working, this applies to you as well. Make sure that when they're at work status at home that they are not working on their laptop laid back on the couch or sideways in the recliner because their ergonomics is off. Consider some calisthenics and stretching exercises. Workplace harassment policies to prevent violence. I don't know if anybody's on here speaking on workplace violence like active shooter. If so, y'all know it's Keneasha. You know I'm not judging you. I don't like active shooter drills and trainings because I always ask this, why are we teaching people how to react to an active shooter in the workplace? Do you ever wonder that? So I ask the question, people say, Keneasha, can you come do active shooter drill? Sure, but why would I do that? Well, because you come and teach us. Why do you worry about an active shooter? People say, well, what if one of my employees, goes postal? That's the term. Here's what I ask. I don't know who else listens, so I'm going to say this kind of low. If you have us come do active shooter training because you're worried about an employee going off on another employee, guess who's also in the active shooter training? That employee. It's not really effective. What you should do is, now if you've got exposure to the general public, you might need something like that in place, like some of the department stores and things like that. But if you're a private workplace, access control, lock your building down. Lock your building down so that people aren't coming in off the street. Now, when you're locking your building down, that may mean Jack's wife can't bring his lunch when he left it. Well, I don't know if Jack's wife is bringing lunch in that paper bag or not. So, Jack, you're going to have to meet your wife off site, or you're going to have to quit leaving your lunch, because we can't let her in the building. Access control. Proper suspensions and terminations. If you are responsible for suspension and termination, you need to be best buddies with IT and your safety security department. Their access needs to be disabled before you suspend and terminate, and their security in the building. So they don't need to have access to be able to send any more emails. I will say this. I've been seeing a lot of this, and it's heartbreaking. Quit letting people work all day and then terminate them. Call them at home, because now you got them from coming in the building, and do that suspension or that termination, unless you physically have to have them in the building. That's something that we suggest for people to do. You've got to make sure that you have eliminated as much contact in a conflicting situation as possible. Workplace bullying, we deal with this all the time. The bully is not the kid in the lunchroom who shakes you up and down and takes your lunch money. There are workplace bullies out there. You need an appropriate workplace behavior policy in place. You need anti-harassment policies in place. You need cultural diversity and inclusion programs in place. These are the things that I would ask for you to address before it gets too far to active shooter. I'm a criminal justice graduate, so I'm all about anything that's gonna physically stop someone. But my answer is always, by the time you've got an active shooter in your building, you are too late. So try to address all of those things first. And then employers have responsibilities. I will not read all these to you. I ask you, when we get off of here, go look for the labor law poster at your facility. First thing, if you do not have one, go online and download that and hang that up in a conspicuous place where all employees can access it. That's usually your poster that's got what minimum wage is, all the state labor laws and things like that. But those are your responsibilities as an employer. And somehow we've kind of gotten lost on what our responsibilities are as employers. And then you've got employees that have rights on that poster as well. We'll talk about their rights. But an OSHA recordable falls under 1904. This QR code, if you hold your camera up and scan that there, like on your phone, that's gonna take you straight to that standard. And it's gonna tell you what is considered an OSHA recordable. It's gonna tell you what's work-related, because there are some things not work-related. If I'm a member of the general public and I shopped at the neighborhood department store, but I worked there, but I tripped and fell when I was there for Black Friday sale, I'm a member of the general public, not a worker. Then you've got standards, what's recordable versus non-recordable. Just because I go to the clinic for a work-related accident doesn't make it recordable. So that's where that standard is. So if you hold that up there, it'll take you to 1910 CFR 1904, and that applies across all industries: construction, general industry, maritime, and agriculture. It will also tell you what's first aid versus medical treatment. Medical treatment sometimes may result in an OSHA recordable, while first aid will not, and that goes into that. But y'all know the normal ones: death, days away from work, job transfer restriction, things like that. So, but that'll take you there. So you hold that up there, or you can Google 1904, but if you hold that there, I have taken the time to make sure that that takes you straight to that reg. When do you call OSHA? This happens quite often. Well, I didn't know I was supposed to call them. Well, if they find out, you're gonna get fined $1,000 a day for failure to report. You call OSHA, hold your hands up, 8 hours. If somebody dies at work, you've got to call OSHA within 8 hours of you getting word of that worker fatality. If you're the person that's got to call OSHA, you need to tell those that may work the 24-hour shifts, even if it's 3 in the morning, they need to call you. Because at the time of death, you've got 8 hours. 24 hours of an amputation. They came to work, they lost it. There's some discrepancy. Well, if it crossed the bone, no, OSHA doesn't, no. You call OSHA. If they came to work with it and they lost it, if it gets reattached later, great. But you got to call OSHA and report the amputation within 24 hours. Then you got to call OSHA within 24 hours of a person getting a bed admitted in the hospital. If they get hurt and they go to the ER, and you know we spend about 5 or 6 hours at the ER on a good day, then they say, well, you know what, we're going to have to admit you. The moment they admit that worker, you've got 24 hours to pick up the phone and call OSHA at the 1-800-321-OSHA number and say, I've got to make a report. They do have it where you can do it online as well. I still suggest call on the number as well. And then your inspections. If you've got 10 or more employees, they're coming. If you had a fatality or a catastrophe that happened, if you had an amputation, hospitalization, if you fell under the local or national emphasis, fabricated metals is still on their national emphasis program. If you're a site-specific targeted industry or a referral, let's say the EPA, let's say you got a permit with Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality with paint, and the ADQ says, well, I think you're emitting too much paint in the environment, and you tweak your system or whatever, and you're like, well, we're going to do a gallon less. Well, you're still emitting too much for that worker. They could refer you over to OSHA. Believe it or not, they'll do it. And then those are your violation types. We hope you never get there where you have to deal with those. Willful violations, serious, other than serious, and repeat. Look at those fine amounts. They have gone up. A serious violation has now increased to $13,600. other than serious is at 13,000. But your willful violations have now almost doubled up to now 136,000. And your repeat, if you've done it within 5 years, it's a repeat. Or if one of your other facilities did it and y'all fall under the same tax ID number, it's considered a repeat violation. So that's where those fine amounts come from. Whistleblower policy. You know how we say your employees have rights? So these employees, you've got to do all this for your employees because you got to protect them. They have rights. Let's say an employee, you violate those rights. They have a number they can call and report you and say, I have had my rights violated. So they call OSHA. Let's say they call OSHA. And you know it was them because you know that was the squeaky wheel. OSHA took their report anonymously, but you know that was Jack. Jack been coming in here every day about that. So you say, I'm going to terminate him. Whistleblower protection is good for 30 days. You cannot retaliate against them. Notice I also have not day 31 and not at day 45 either. So be careful when you have to terminate a worker who has exercised their rights. Make sure if it's for attendance, that your attendance records to show they broke attendance was airtight. If it was for illegal use of drugs, make sure that drug screening was done properly. Don't ever get in a position where it looks like you retaliated against one of those workers because then they'll call the whistleblower number. And I think they told us it was like 12 people in their office here in Little Rock. Interesting. So they're ready to take those complaints. A lot of people have contractors working at their workplace, and that's kind of a breakdown of how the employers work when you've got contractors in your workplace. But you could be the creating employer, the exposing employer, whichever one you fall into. But if they're working at your workplace, you have a duty to protect them as well. So you need contractor safety policies in line as well. So if they're working at your facility, you have to protect them as well. Y'all say hello to Jacob. That picture is just perfect. Because everybody said, where do I start? I don't know what to do. Where do I start? Well, we tell you, go to the OSHA page and search the most frequently violated standards. Those are the standards we've seen violated in the last year, are the ones we've gotten the most phone calls on saying, help us, OSHA's at the door. But you can check there. Subscribe to OSHA Quick Takes. You can go to OSHA's page and be updated anytime something happens that may affect your industry. Attend worker safety conferences in your area. Arkansas Department of Labor and Licenses, they put on worker safety conferences all over the state. We just, tomorrow was supposed to be Ashdown, and Ashdown, when something went wrong with the facility, so it's having to be rescheduled. But they're all over the state. Attend those. Or get regulatory compliance assistance, your workers' comp insurance carrier, your loss control departments over at your carrier, Department of Labor, Health and Safety Division, Arkansas Workers' Comp. You can even call OSHA's office. They have a compliance assistance specialist and ask them for help. Or private consultants, or what I like to always tell people, or just call Keneasha Scott. We'll take care of you. Just call us if you need to know where to start. So those are the things I wanted to make sure that we all were aware of. We want to come in out the dark. We want to get past all of these things. It's not that COVID was not important for us to focus on. But in our industry, unfortunately, what we have seen happen, people have gotten so focused on just COVID that we still have other workplace accidents and fatalities that are on the rise. The majority of these things we mentioned have been regulations and have been around since 1971. We're at the 50-year mark. So our goal is to make sure that you're aware of those things, and we wanted to touch back on them at this conference and make sure that you knew that while COVID is deserving of protection, and we've got to prevent people from being exposed to it, injured by it, and subsequently, the sad part, we want to make sure people aren't dying from it. But we want to make sure that you realize that all of these other regulations are around, and we've got to make sure that we keep our workers safe. So those are just some highlights right there for you to go over. So I thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and you can give us a call if you need to dig into this a little bit further and go from there. Or you can call the OSHA office, the compliance assistance specialist there. Everybody works really closely together because the mission is the same. So I'm Keneasha Scott. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And everyone remember to stay safe.